crowded city slums in the developing world, mass movements from rural areas to cities, drought conditions across Africa, deforestation and increasing periods of no rain in Asia, too much water, floods and soil degradation. All seemingly relevant to climate change, the subject under discussion at the Royal United Services Institute in London.
There's three figures that I like to cite when I give these types of talks about predictions of environmental refugees in the future, and most of them are based on the assumption that climate change will cause tremendous hardship in the developing world. There's one that came out in 2005 from the United Nations University's Environment Institute in Bonn, which predicted that by the year 2010, which is no longer so far off, there would be 50 million environmental refugees around the world. Norman Myers, a well-known British ecologist whose work has been quoted in the Stern Report, has suggested by the end of the century we can look at approximately 200 million environmental refugees, primarily again as a result of climate change and the downstream effects of that. And then there's Christian Aid, an organization for which I have a lot of time because of all the many years of good work they've done with helping displaced people in the developing world over the years. They've suggested that by 2050 you're looking at up to 1 billion people who would fit some sort of general definition of an environmental refugee in the worst case scenario. What you see is that there's this vast range of predictions, time frames, and so on. In other words, no one's got a really good handle on this yet in terms of making forward predictions. No one has a crystal ball yet.
Dr. McCleman said governments could no longer just let one department handle these issues. It had to be a truly concerted, across-the-board effort.
If you take one message away from what I'm suggesting here is that climate change, migration, and security come down to household bread and butter decisions. They're at the root of it. If people have a good house over there, a good roof over their heads, and 3 square meals a day, and a job to go to in the morning, and so on, security risks inherently diminish. And so that's sort of at the core of all of this. And so I know that the British government is doing great jobs channeling development assistance to Africa for climate change adaptation, for example. I wouldn't limit just to Africa. I'd increase your spending there. If I were your Prime Minister, I would increase my development spending there, but I'd also expand it to other parts of the world as well. And be bold about your development spending too. Be creative, be innovative, and so on. Make sure that we don't follow the bad old models of the 80s and 70s and 80s and early 90s where money was just given off blindly that just disappeared down pipelines and wells and so on. And I think, again, my final message is climate, migration, security, military affairs. We tend to, as policymakers, put them into silos. You're the minister for this, you're the minister for that, and so on. And if they talk at all, it's only occasionally at a cabinet table. That policy model, policy-making model, and policy delivery model isn't going to work in coming decades. I really don't see it working. And so international development has to become a military priority. It has to become a priority for the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It has to be a priority at the Home Office, and so on, and vice versa. There has to be coordinated, concerted efforts to link all these things. Otherwise, if it continues to be treated as silos in policy making, we're swimming upstream.
Again, he praised the UK government for its development projects.
The UK government has taken a real lead role, and as I've said, I hope it's not simply a case of inertia, but I hope it's momentum that the UK will continue to take a leading role. And in fact, I think the UK shouldn't be so modest as it has been about its role in international development, in climate change policy at the international scale, and so on. UK has emerged as a leader, so I really hope that you take the reins and go with it.
A stimulating session. The end game, more concerted and linked efforts by the global community to help in sustained international development.